I am on campus today, so brought to you from a weird hallway in the design studio. We're going to go over chapters 8 and 9. First off, we have objectives and outcomes. Read chapters 8 and 9, understanding the 9 steps to the costume design process, 4 reasons why humans cover and decorate their bodies, the costume sketch and why it's used, 2 phases of creation, research, aesthetics, sketching, color stories, roughs, and final renderings, costume creation, and the production process. 4 universal clothing attributes why we wear clothing. We wear it for protection, sexuality, decoration, and social order. And now we're going to break them down a little bit more. We wear clothing for protection. This includes outside forces like weather, cold, hot, wet, and dry. So, of course, when you wear a jacket in the winter or you wear snow boots in the snow so your feet won't freeze off. This includes war in combat, and this makes me think of like, I don't know why I'm thinking about Halo, but the suits that soldiers wear, but then also in older days, like how knights would wear whole suits of armor because that would protect their whole body, except for like right here where you can, there's always a spot. But yeah, so they would wear that kind of clothing. We wear clothing for sexuality. We design how we look to gain the attention of a mate. Once we gain the attention, we use it for procreation. And when I think about this, I think about how the color red is sexy, and people wear like red to attract, or like a brighter color, or like a nice black dress. And actually, just everybody looks better when they're dressed up, to be honest. So if you were trying to impress somebody on a date, you would probably wear a button up if you're a guy, or maybe like a casual suit, and a girl would dress up and do her hair and makeup, and you're trying to attract that person. But after being in a relationship with somebody for so many years, you probably don't put the same effort into what you wear as when you were in the beginning of that relationship. Decoration. This is how we want to look and how we want others to perceive us. Examples of this are tattoos, piercings, hairstyles, and how clothing sits on our body. Definitely, I usually sometimes have weird colors in my hair. I have lots of piercings, and like I have some tattoos. So like those type of looks that you're trying to create make you different and stand off from different people. So, and like I always say that I want more tattoos because I think it's like creating a story like on your body, and your body is the canvas. So we do decorate ourselves. And then we wear clothing for social order, status within our society, low, middle, upper class, follower, leader, and then status within the workforce, grunt worker, middle management, and boss. And this you can see like even from retail, like a manager might wear a different color shirt, whereas salespeople on the floor or whomever is working with just the lower part of retail, they wear a different color shirt. Or if you're thinking about definitely in military, they have different types of jackets, and you have different decorative emblems, and all of that is different to kind of show your status. And I guess this could even be considered when you're thinking about the type of brands of clothing you wear. If you're somebody who wants to show off to people that you're rich or well off, you're probably going to wear a lot of designer brand clothing like Louis Vuitton and Chanel. And you're like, yes, I am that type of person. So it all depends. Something to think about when you are working on a play. This is probably something that might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised when designing. A lot of people just ignore this fact. But when is the play set? This expresses snapshots of historical times. It is a period of time. First thing to consider, when is the play set? It changes the silhouette, the shape, the textures, accessories to go with the time. If you look at the differences between the 1930s and the 1940s in fashion, and again, I'm just going to think about women. In the 30s, we weren't, I think people were suffering from the Great Depression, and the age of like Hollywood was starting to pick up. And so you see women in beautiful, glamorous dresses with lots of fabric, and it's flowing, and they're gorgeous. But then when you go into the 1940s, we were in World War II, and all hands were on deck. And so we needed the fabric ration for the war. I mean, of course, they're not using like nice fabrics like you would for those dresses, but it was still like in solidarity for the war and the war efforts, that people wore things that were just more like the box shape, and it was like cute pencil skirts and things like that started to come out because of the way the world was. And then a silhouette is the external shape of a costume, irrespective of color, texture, and type of fabric. Research is extremely important for a costume designer. It helps identify the character and at what level the character identifies to others. This is true in period pieces and really all things when you're trying to express costumes. The more you know about the character and how you costume them can help the character actor also. So if your character is of lower class, what would their costume look like versus somebody with a lot of money on stage? There would obviously need to be a different, even if they're in the same time period. And then you must design clothing that serves whatever the function necessary. So these are things you have to think about. Does the character sing on stage? So she probably, the character, if it's a woman, you don't want her to be laced in a really, really tight corset because maybe she won't be able to do the functions of singing. Do they dance? So that means they need to have good shoes and able to move on stage. Do they need to climb a ladder? That means you probably don't want a female in a tight pencil skirt because she won't be able to climb a ladder very comfortably or easily. Does the costume need to fit through doors? Is this a period piece like a French opera where there's huge skirts and it's very glamorous and grand? But if they have to fit through a door, do you want to? It's not cute to see an actor kind of shimmy through a door to try to get through it. And then how many quick changes are there? And what a quick change is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's changing from one costume into another costume quickly because maybe it's in one scene, it's daytime and your character is in a day outfit, but then it switches to the next scene and they're going to a nice dinner. So, and a lot of times in transitions, you have anywhere from like 5 to maybe 45 seconds to get them changed. And that's like 45 seconds is a lot of dead time on stage if an audience is not watching anything. So you really have to think about how to make these quick changes quicker. So do they have something under their costume in their evening, like a course? I mean, I said corsets aren't good for singing, but do they have like a shirt that would be good for evening under their daytime blouse? So then and maybe the blouse has snap buttons on it, so you just rip off the shirt and then they're in already one part of it. It's things to think about of like how the costumes have to work together from scene to scene. Reading the play like a costume designer. Things to think about. Where does the play take place? Is the location the country or a city? If you think about the play, The Importance of Being Earnest, you can see the difference between Cecily, who lives in the country, and then Gwendolyn, who lives in the city, because there's different type of fashion. When does the play take place? What year? What time of year? And what time of day? What year makes a difference? Because there are fashion trends that are different every year, and like we do know those things. So like what was more in fashion that year versus like we think about the 60s or like the 70s as one like whole big thing of like, oh, they just wore tie-dye shirts or whatever, but like, you know, they had different things happening periodically through the years just like we do in our fashion. And then what time of year makes a difference, because you're trying to think about, do my characters need jackets if it's winter? If it's a period piece, do they need umbrellas or shading? Time of day, because if it's nighttime, maybe it's chilly and they need like a light sweater, versus if it's the daytime, maybe they do not. So just more things to think about. The more specific you can think about your design and what's happening in the world of the play, the better your design will be. It's your job as a designer and actually anybody in the play, to analyze it and try to figure out the pieces that the playwright doesn't just tell you. The script is there and the playwright gave you some stuff, and then like as somebody who can analyze the script, you can find clues or make assumptions that you could probably justify that make it true. What is the world like when the play takes place? How's the government? What's the church like? Characters, social beliefs about, everyday conduct, relationships, marriage, sex, children. Is this play in a weird dystopia future world where there is no government? What does that mean for the costumes? Is this a play during Puritan times where people are very religious and they're very buttoned up? That makes a difference. If you have a character who's not buttoned up on stage when everybody else is, what does that say about that other character? What happened before the play began? This is things like with, you think about the stasis of the world. You think about, like, with Romeo and Juliet, just as an example. We know what happened, but we don't really know what happened. We know that there are two families feuding and they have never liked each other. So if you wanted to make a costume design where, like, each each side of the family was like a gang and they had a color specified with them, that's something you could figure out because of the way that they did not like each other and been feuding, and that's something you could put into your design. What clothing references are mentioned in the text? This is super important, and when you go through the script as a designer for the first time, and I do it as a stage manager to think about props because I have to help figure out what rehearsal props we need, you go through it and you just read the lines that the characters say. It might not be in the stage directions, which say, like, has a red sweater. It might be a line like, oh, you look darling in that red sweater. So that means whatever character is being spoken to is wearing a red sweater. And then who should the audience be focusing on? Would you want, I guess again, I'm going to just say Romeo and Juliet. You'd probably want Juliet in a prettier costume or a costume with, like, more vibrant colors, nicer material than her mother. Because, like, her mom is in, like, one scene, maybe, no, she's in, like, four. But, like, nobody cares about her mom as much as you care about Juliet. So you want the audience to focus on her, especially if there's scenes like in the ballroom scene of Romeo and Juliet where there's a whole bunch of people, presumably, you still want the focus to be on her. And yes, lighting could probably help with the spotlight if that's the type of, like, lighting design it is, but as a costume designer, you should also be thinking about how to make her stand out from some. When you're helping to create the character, and this also means creating the costume of the character, because as a production team and everybody, you're all creating the same character, and yeah. So think about the age. One character, if she's younger, if she's 17, she might not wear something that a 40-year-old character would because, I mean, you guys are younger. You don't dress like your 40-year-old mom or whatever. You wear very different clothing. Think about the social class. Again, I mentioned this before. So, like, are they in nicer fabrics and clothing rather than more raggedy clothing, depending on their social class? Think about their financial position. Just like with people in real life wearing designer versus non-designer, is that something? Do they have more jewelry because they have more money? Do they have less jewelry because they have less money, less accessories, more accessories? Marital status, especially in period plays, or even, like, not even now. If you're married, maybe you dress differently from somebody who's single and still trying to attract a mate. Maybe that's something to think about. Their health. This could go into, like, do they need a cane? Is that something that they have, like, a debilitating illness, which, like, makes them move differently? Are they constantly bedridden? So does that mean they have to wear a pajama all the time? Moral beliefs. Again, going into the religious, are they more buttoned up because they believe in morals and they believe in being chaste? What is their job? Is this person a workaholic? Does that mean they're always in business attire because even when they're off the clock, they're thinking about business? Mental state. Is a character put together so then you dress normally, or is the character constantly in disarray and that means, or like confused, or maybe they're always stressed out. So maybe some pieces in their costumes don't match, and that helps signify their, like, mental state, that they're not all together and they are wearing two different socks because, man, he or she had no time to figure out which sock is which, and it's just, you're lucky that you get a sock on. And, like, does that mean their buttons are a little bit off? Like, where are they coming from? Education. This could mean, like, I don't know, maybe you have a student who went to Yale and he always likes to wear his Yale jacket. That could be something. Or maybe if you're more educated, you look different and you think differently than somebody who's less educated. Country of origin. Different countries have different styles, so you got to think about that. And then there are tons of more things that you can think about. So I'm sure you guys can probably think of some things that were not mentioned in this slide too.
Okay, different day. I'm recording again. So some things to think about when you're looking at the script in design. What is the size and scope of the kind of script? Is this a script that calls for a lot of stuff? There's been a lot of times where the script should have been simple and doesn't call for all of the things. I had a show about, maybe I mentioned this before. I don't know what classes I mention things in anymore. But it was about going to the underworld, and like a brother died, and so he committed suicide. And then they go down to the underworld, and it's the Chinese god and goddess, the Monkey King, who he interprets, and they have a DDR board. Oh, I did talk about this with the plastic DDR board. But anyway, that design of a show, in nowhere in the script did it call for projections. But the director was like, you know what would make this really great, and like just top notch projections. So that is nowhere in the size and scope of the play when the season was picked that they thought it would be, but then it got bigger. So I don't know if that's like a director thing more than a size thing, but a lot of times the director will take the size and scope of what you initially think the play might be to a whole nother level. A thing that is super important is to how to translate the director's concept through costumes. I'm going to go back to the Crucible forever, and I think I could probably pull up some renderings for you. The Crucible, which we all know as a Puritan, I think 1700s play, which it should just stay in that time period. We had a director who took it and he did it in a dystopia future. And in the dystopia future, he was like, you know what, these costumes need to look like, he was like paper bags, like no like colors, like make it, but also somehow Puritan-y. So the costume designer had to be like, okay, let me take this vision and try to create your concept and create a vision that we both agree on. I will say it was a little bit weird. You have to prioritize aspects that fit both the director's vision and your personal choice. That show is actually probably not a good example because I think the designer, she kind of just went with more of what he wanted, and then there was a lot of like actors were talking to him and changing his mind, and he wasn't talking to her. So that was actually not the best. But you normally, as a designer, you should stick to the things that are important to you, but then compromise on things that maybe the director also wants. So then that way you guys can have a melding of something in between both of the things you want. You need to manipulate color and texture to tell a wordless story. I'm going to use, I think I always use Importance of Being Earnest as an example. If you want Cecily, who's the young ward of Ernest, John, same guy, that's the whole point of the play. She's 18 or 17 and she's his ward, and she's innocent. So like, and they have roses, and so maybe she loves roses. Maybe you're telling a story about things that she likes, like roses and her youth, I don't know, being a rosebud, as like a pattern in her costume. Maybe that's something that you want to express. And then if you think about a lot of times teachers or professors in like older settings, I don't think they always wear like tweed jackets now, but when you think of stuffy intellectual, you might think about those tweed jackets with the elbow patch. Make that work for you. And then some other things that you have to think about is like maybe you as the costume designer, you're like, this is what the script says, but maybe the director casts more people. Or maybe the director, again, I'm going to say Crucible, the script, Tituba is supposed to be a Haitian woman from Hades, and she might know voodoo, which is like the whole parameter of why she might be a witch, and she's supposed to be a black woman or a woman of color. And that director decided that Tituba is going to be a white man, a white gay man in drag. That is like, in nowhere would you think that that would be a thing. But that's something to consider, that your initial thoughts in the script might not be what comes about. Are there multiple roles, which means that actors play different people on stage. So they're different characters. So how are you going to make character A different from character B, even though they both are the same person and look different? Are you going to change their hair? Obviously, you're going to change their costume. Is there going to be colors that definitely separate them? Are they going to be polar opposites? Think about how to make the audience member believe that that is a different character on stage, even though it's the same actor. Is the show double cast? This can be super tricky, especially if you have a small budget. If you have two actors that are completely different sizes, you have to think about what kind of material you're going to use to make their costume. Is it going to be something that you buy off the rack instead of spend time making because it takes so much more time and maybe effort and cost to make that? So you have to think about what that would mean if you have cast pink. I'm saying pink because we've done that, like cast pink on one night and then cast purple on the other night. How does that affect your design and your budget at the end of the day? Quick changes. I mentioned some stuff about quick changes before. If they have in one scene and then they have like 15 to 30 seconds to get on stage as a different character or in a different outfit, does that mean they have something underneath that is a base? So then, and like, are there a jacket? Is it snapped together so it just easily comes off? Or is it something Velcroed? So then like you could make that change quicker. Are there understudies or swings? We don't do understudies a lot here, but if there is an understudy, if anything happens to an actor, and again, they don't wear the same size as the principal actor, you need to think about how would that costume, how could I make it in a budget-friendly time, and like how can I make it so two completely different people could wear similar costumes or the same costume. And a lot of times it doesn't have to be the exact same costume if you are double cast or you have an understudy. You can think about how it still fits in the same similarity of the world, but if, like, for instance, one actor is a lot bigger than the other one or a lot taller, maybe the department store or Savers or wherever you're going to find their costume has a brown vest, which calls for both of them to wear, but maybe one of them is a different color brown than the other one. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it could be in the same realm. So the characters still have that sense of identity and your design isn't completely compromised. Rehearsal skirts and pieces. This is very important, especially if there's dancing numbers. Actors probably need their shoes, and if it's a period piece and an actress needs to walk around as wearing a huge like hoop skirt, and how does she sit down in that? You don't want to go into dress rehearsal a couple nights before opening and then all of a sudden she realizes she can't sit in a chair and her blocking has to change dramatically. So as a costume designer, you need to think about giving your actors and your stage manager and the rehearsal room some costumes so the actors can start working with it early, so you can really realize the limitations of what can and can't happen with the specs of the costume, which a lot of times the director will totally work out. It's just, there isn't a lot of time when you rehearse, then you put up a show. A lot of times it's moving very fast and it might look like a lot of time, but there really isn't. So you want to like be cautious and prepare people as best you can. And then last are their allergens. We just did human comedy, and a lot of the everybody had to wear these clear masks, and we had one actress who she's allergic to whatever the plastic is. We didn't know that. And actually, I don't even think we would have thought about that, because you, as a costume designer, should ask, like, are they allergic to wool or something? So then you know to avoid that fabric. But she had wipes backstage to wipe off her face after every time she put on the mask because she did have an allergic reaction to it. More things to think about are performance parameters. Stage elements such as blood, water, fire, flying. Blood is every costumer's nightmare. It's really hard to get out of costumes. And like when I think about how in Shakespeare's time they actually used real blood bladders and like pig's blood, I'm like, I have no idea how they got that out of costumes, because now we have all of the washers and dryers in the world and technology and like shout. And yet costumers always are upset when there's fake blood. So maybe you would have a costume piece that isn't white, or a lot of times when there is fake blood, the wardrobe crew, right after that happens, they go straight to a sink and wash it out or do whatever. They shout it, they scrub it, they do whatever the costume designer told them to get that stain out. And a lot of times when there is blood, there needs to be, and it's something like white especially, there needs to be backups, at least one or two backups for the costume piece in case, you know, you run so many times that just the stain remover doesn't remove the stain eventually. Water. Yes, you got to think about water too. If the costume gets wet and then maybe it's an actor who wears the same like look every day, there needs to be a backup dry costume because there's no way you can dry the costume between scenes. Or we did a show called Marcus and there was a lot of rain from the sky and actual water. We had a pool and everything, and the costume designer decided to use it to her benefit. She found this type of paint that when it gets wet at a certain temperature too, which like matched the water, and she tested it, it would then like turn parts purple, and she put a lot of symbols and writing that matched the culture that was being explored in the play. So that's something that you could think about. Fire, I have nothing to say about this. I've never seen fire on stage. Okay. But with fire, all show curtains and stuff is flame retardant already. So we did a show called The Flick, and yes, I'm talking about scenic for a second, where we had fabrics and like we had to put flame retardant on it. If there's fire on stage, you're for sure gonna flame retardant those costume pieces because you do not want an actor to catch on fire. And luckily, theaters don't catch on fire as much as they used to, because we have electric lighting now. And then flying, if you're doing Peter Pan, you need to think about how the costume can be comfortable for the actor to actually fly in, and you don't want an actor to be in a skirt at that point because then everybody's going to see upper business. Or if she is in a skirt, make sure she's wearing tights or shorts. It's just things to think about. On stage changes. For Legally Blonde, there's an on stage change, and it was a dress, we did it here, where it had a quick release, a Velcro in the back, I think, or quick snaps, and the dress needed to just slip right on, and it was her Delta Nu girls were covering her so she could do the change on stage and then come out of it in her new dress. So things like that exist, and you have to think about crafty ways of how to do the costume change. And sometimes the director helps by lending blocking. So that's a discussion that a costume designer and the director should probably have together. But the costume designer needs to think about how they can help aid the moment. So then that could help inform the director. Techies needing costumes. A lot of times, and this is a trend that's happening more and more, I've been seeing nowadays, that you don't want to see, if your actors can't do the transitions on stage and a technician has to, and maybe it's a period piece, you don't want to see people in black clothing coming out because it takes you totally out of the moment. So a lot of times, if that really bothers the director, costume designers will provide or talk to crew members to be like, okay, do you have khakis or whatever kind of like feels like the world of the play that they provide themselves, and that's what they wear instead of their blacks. And then maybe they help accessorize them. But that's something that costumers have to also think about depending on the show and what the director wants and the needs of that specific production. Maintenance during, after, duplicate costumes needed. Sometimes costumes rip. You need to have either teach your wardrobe crew how to mend the costumes, and usually there's a sewing kit backstage. I, as an ASM, have had to sew a small hole in a costume, and the stage manager needs to put anything like that in their performance reports, and then the costumer will come in maybe the next day and fix it. If the show is touring, you need to think about how the costume, how it could travel. Can it travel in can it be boxed up and shipped, or like moves around with the touring company, or is it something delicate that will break? A lot of times if it's a fantasy piece like Shrek and things like that, a lot of the pieces are very intimate, or they look like very delicate, because in a fantasy world it's not just like some cloth fabric. There's also things attached to it to make the costume seem more fantastical. So how does that affect the durability of the costume? And then if you're remounting the show, you want to store the costumes safely so you can use them again in the future. The costume design process starts with understanding the 4 reasons humans cover their body: protection, sexuality, decoration, and social order. Costumes, and just like fashion, has always moved propelled forward, and there are differences in each notable century that makes it different. It's always evolving, but it's also really recycled. Right now, the 90s are coming back, and I'm very excited. I hope I didn't say that already. Materials and construction. Swatches. Playing card size scraps of fabric that are used to demonstrate what a costume will be made of. This is something that you have on your color roughs or your rendering, so the director can feel them and see exactly what the material is and see how it kind of like would go together. Some directors are definitely more hands-on in this than some other directors. Natural fibers, we have wool, cotton, and silk. Synthetic fibers, nylon, polyester, and spandex. 4 ways of costuming a design: building, buying, renting, and pulling in alterations. So building means that you are taking the costume from the ground up. You are going to design it, you're going to create patterns for it, and you're going to sew it. Maybe not you, but your costume shop and whomever is working on the project. But that costume is coming from scratch and nothing else. Then you could buy it. A lot of times with more modern plays, you can go to thrift stores and find a lot of stuff that you need. Renting, especially for like Oregon Shakespeare Festival, they rent out their costumes. You can borrow from other universities who might have a big stock, and so you can look around to see if there's something that matches what you need at a different company. Because at the end of the day, will building it be too much work and cost too much in the end than renting it? It's one of those like time versus money decisions that you have to make. And then pulling and alterations. Pulling means taking from your own costume stock. And at like UNLV, we have a pretty big costume stock because we're a school and we do a lot of shows and we have sort of room. I mean, it's getting pretty overfilled in like all of our stuff. Like we have too much stuff everywhere, but we have a good stock. And like it might not be something that you pull and use exactly. You can always alter it. So maybe there is a dress, it's a sleeveless dress that might look good, and then you're just like, oh, well, if I add some bell sleeves to this or something, it would be perfect and would match the character. So different ways to think about how you need to do your costuming. Hair and makeup. Hair and makeup designers work directly with the costume designers. In-house makeup artists exist, yet often small or academic theaters require actors to execute their own makeup and hair. And period style and wound bruising makeup requires extensive research. And a lot of times you, especially on small or medium and university levels, you don't have a person to do it. So it takes a lot of YouTubing and like trying to figure out how to make that happen. For the actor, rehearsal clothes. Garments that the costume shop provides to the actors so they can acclimate themselves to the clothing. I mentioned this before. If you have a corset or a hoop skirt or something, or specific shoes, an actor should get it early so then the director and the actor can know how they can use the costume or like what is limiting them because of the costume. Rehearsal clothes are extremely important, especially if it is a period piece. Think about how clothing informs how you stand, move, and act. Would a corset allow free movement? It would not. Fittings. A scheduled time when the actor's body measurements are taken to help construct the garment. Also a scheduled time when the actor tries costumes on. So first you have actors come in so you can take their base measurements. So you can either go pull, build, buy, alter stuff, rent stuff, and see if it's their size. And then once you actually have the pieces, and if you're building it, you'll probably have some like little fittings to be like, does this jacket fit before I finish like the sleeves or anything? But you figure out if it actually looks good on their body and if it fits their body and like how it all looks together. So fitting later on is actually trying on the costume and seeing how it all works. A quick change is changing out of one costume and into another at a rapid rate.